Welcome to episode 93 of the Coast to Coast AFL podcast, Minnick and Blaze. I am Blaze, your host, and in this one, we're talking about Port Adelaide. This is Josh Carr's first season at the helm. They still have a lot of their pre-existing pieces from last year. However, they are riddled with injury, and it's so far not the greatest of pre-seasons from them. As we've just heard, Big Ivan Soldo will be out for most of the year. So there's one ruck possibility down the drain. So we're going to hope that we get some better news as we talk about this preseason analysis. But before that, how are you doing, Mr. Sarek?
Not too bad, not too bad. And yeah, so this is a bit more interesting. As I said, it's obviously, for those who don't know, I support Port Adelaide in the men's competition. Always fond of Port Adelaide in the W, of course. But yeah, as I said, it's yeah, a bit of a hard one to swallow as a fan. I liked Ken Hinkley. Even though I think that, he probably wasn't the coach to take us to a premiership. I think he got a bit stale at the end, but I am very happy with the great football that I enjoyed over the last 10 years. I'm really happy to see what Carr can bring to the table. But yeah, as I said, but in terms of just in general, yeah, house sitting, as you can tell by the background, looking after Banjo for a weekend while my my aunt, uncle, cousin go to Rottnest. They'll be enjoying themselves over there, taking some selfies with the quokkas, and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I'm going good.
As we all wish we could do, take some photos with the quackers on Rottnest. It,
Yeah,
it,
no, it's
it,
there.
it'd be
Wonderful.
nice to go back. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not doing too bad. It might be a Saturday for the rest of the. Oh, actually, no, sorry, it's a Friday. It's a Friday as we're recording. It's not a Saturday. Silly me. Might be a Friday for the rest of the world, but for me, it's my Tuesday because I worked. So I'm tired, but we're coasting through. It's gonna be a very busy day for me on the Saturday. But I'm looking forward to it. It's gonna be a good time. All right, shall we just jump straight into it then?
Yeah, let's get in. And of course, we're talking about Port Adelaide. It's all a bit of questions. Carr has taken control of the wheel. Whether they're going straight to a rebuild, whether they can just turn around is another question. We've also got Albert, the new therapy dog. If you haven't been looking at Port Social, he's been one of the stars of the off season. And yeah, as I said, hopefully the injury bug stays away from him. But yeah, as I said, it's actually sort of nice. I think it was brought in for some of the people with long-term injuries just to keep them company at the club when they're, sort of training away. So I always like to see that. But let's get into the nitty-gritty. And probably what I'm trying to avoid is how they went last season because, oh boy, it was disappointing, and it was disappointing from the start, really. We had that terrible loss to the Magpies at the MCG, where they just didn't look in it at all. Turned it around a bit with the Tigers win. Obviously, we both were present at that game at Adelaide Oval. It was a great visit. It was a bit bittersweet for both of us. Blaze obviously enduring that loss, and that was when Port Adelaide lost Jack Lukosius to the first 5 minutes of the game. And then some really disappointing losses, the Bombers and Saints. Great win against Hawthorn. Started to get their season back with 3 wins on the trot. And then just a terrible back half of the season. They lost their defensive lineup. It was, I think, Asava went down along that time. Aaliyah went down for a few matches. Brendan Zerk-Thatcher went out for the big part of the season. Lockie Jones late suffered a few. Miles Bergman suffered a few. So they just ran out of cattle at the end of the day. And then they still sort of made it up in Ken Hinkley's last game by getting an upside win against the Suns. You had players like Harrison Ram playing their first game in defense because they just had no one else. But otherwise, yeah, it was a very disappointing season. Their forward line was literally Mitch Georgiadis and no one else. He tried to make his way to the Coleman, but fell a tiny bit short. But yeah, it's not really much to say. Just, as I said, overall, there was only really a few players with really consistent seasons. Zach Butters, obviously, fantastic season. Rosie, I still think some of his disposal could use a bit of work, but he did enjoy that move on halfback.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but yeah, as I said, the rest were very few and far between in 2025 for Port Adelaide.
Yeah, that's not many positive signs to come out of the 2025 season. Some nice wins, but it was very few and far between. The injuries just kept coming and coming. Started in the forward end, then it hit the midfield for a bit, and then most of it happened in the back in the second half. It was just horror all over the shop, and it's going to be really, really interesting to see if Port are able to get a lot of their key injuries on the park this time around, or if
Mm.
because as I just mentioned, Soldo is now out for most of the season. Granted, you have Sweet and Visitini that are going to kind of be the number one, number
Yeah,
two anyway.
I
But
think
there's
they're the
also a
only
couple
ones
others as
confirmed
well.
out for there's a few missing pre-season a tiny bit, but I think actually most of the injuries from last year are looking to head back at least near-ish round one. I think there's another one that might be missing a bit of the start. But yeah, as I said, overall, it's not too bad. But yeah, as I said, at least for depth-wise, losing Soldo is a bit unfortunate. He sort of fell on the outer anyway, but as I said, it does mean that Visitini is probably going to have to step up early. Um,
Yes,
but yeah, should we go to the stats?
we
Because as I said,
shall,
we'll
and
talk about some of
as
the individuals
and as we can
a bit.
see,
But
um,
yeah,
there's a lot of red.
yeah, pretty much. And honestly, the defense is sort of, it is what it is. They lost half their players, but I think a lot of the disappointment would have come from their midfield where they're expecting a bit more. But we'll start with the offense. We all know Port, their small forwards were always a bit suspect. Willie Rioli sort of coming in and out. End up retiring at the end of the season, so they're going to have to start from there. But it's going to be a very low bar to start from because, as I said, there's not that much interesting even. Most of the fundamentals are just like edging towards the bottom sixth on the ladder. Goals 10.6 15th, shots 23.6 14th, inside 50s 49 13th, accuracy 44.9 14th, change to score 18.68% 14th, goals per inside 50 12.7% 14th, inside 50 retention rate 45.3 15th%. So pretty much just mediocre execution in their forward line in any regard. Yeah, offensive 1-on-1 win rate, 23 16th in the league. They were very poor at converting turnovers into marks inside 50, which is why I think that's a bit low. Offensive 1-on-1s, 11.2, tied 7th in the game. They just sort of wasted a lot of chains, and it was a poor kicking inside their forward 50. Forward 50 ground ball gets was another concern because while they were, marking okay in the forward line, when everyone went to ground, there was just no one present. They got 12.7 per game, which is 16th in the league. And to cap it all off, it is a huge thanks to Mitch Georgiadis and just some of the wily nature of some of our smaller forwards to get a few marks inside 50. They managed 11.7, tied 8th in the league, and their marking inside 50 rate was 24, tied 5th in the league. But what you got to realize is Port took a lot of wide shots. So they had a high marking inside 50 rates, but a lot of their shots were that long, wide boundary angle that like most teams sort of allow you to take in lieu of having a more dangerous marking lead pattern.
Yeah, that's right. There just wasn't too much going for the port power up at the forward line. It was mostly just Miss Shortiadis. Obviously with Lukosius being out for most of the season, and no one else kind of really being around. Pal Pepper was around for a bit and then got injured as well. Had to bring in a couple of the newer players that you had brought in that he had signed on in the past couple of years, and they were hit and miss. They were mostly just filling
Mm.
gaps. So it's just very unfortunate that a lot of it just didn't really work out.
Yeah, because I said the other downside is obviously Willie Rioli was a second leading goal kicker with 27 goals. The only other person scoring more than a goal a game. Actually, no, Sam Pepper did. He just didn't have enough games. So, yeah, as I said, So it means that Mitch Georgiadis and Darcy Byrne-Jones are technically our most potent forwards for next season, which is a bit of a concern. But as I said, we get Lukosius back. We'll see if that helps spread out. And obviously, we made a few off-season moves that might help that cause.
Yes.
But we'll go to defense, where, as I said, it sort of fell apart. They were okay at the start of the season. They had a few teething problems. They were a bit tall and a bit slow, got exposed at times. But I actually think Asava, Ilya, and Zerk Thatcher did lift just before they all separated due to injuries. So overall, though, it was some pretty poor numbers. They allowed 13.5 goals against, which is 14th in the league. Opposition goals per inside 50, 24.5, 12th in the league. Opposition change of score 22nd, 13th. Change of score 22nd, 2%, 13th in the league. Inside 50 retention rate 48.1, 12th in the league. Opposition marks inside 50, 12.5, 12th in the league. Opposition mark inside 50 rate 22.7, 9th in the league. So again, some of their totals that they got on their park kept opponents somewhat honest. Opponent inside 50 ground ball gets, they allowed 16.8, which is last in the league. As we mentioned, they're a pretty tall back line and a bit slow. Defensive 1-1 loss, 27.6, 10th in the league. So not too bad, considering they were forced into 12.3 contests per game, which is third in the league. Opposition defensive half score, they were actually fairly solid, 31.1, 9th in the league. But the opposition score from forward half was 50, 16th in the league. So the ball sort of just got trapped in there. They were pretty loose in the stoppages, especially on the outer side of stoppages. So if opponents got the first clearance, they were able to make a few scoring chains. And yeah, as I said, there just wasn't enough pressure applied in the forward half area. And a lot of defensive half turnovers as well. That was a huge problem. Exits getting intercepted for easy score. And finally, spoils, as you can imagine, not terrible. Probably would have been better again if the Tolls stayed healthy. But 13.3, which is tied 11th in the league.
Yeah, I completely agree that we definitely watched Leo Sava and Brandon Zerk really step up a lot more. Just purely because out of necessity. Stepping up is probably part of why they got injured. So debatable as to whether it was really worth it in the long run. But
I don't know if they stepping up got there. As Zach Thatcher's made of glass at the best of time. I guess really it was Asava that sort of hurt a bit more. I think Aaliyah actually played most of the season. It's just his impact sort of waned at the back half because of all the injuries.
Yeah.
But yeah, as I said, they were sort of restricting to their moves. They had to move Miles Bergman back a lot more after he found a spot in the midfield. Connor Rosie, as I said, sort of floated between the two. And then you had just, Lockie Jones, who did good until he got injured. So as I said, it was just pretty much hopscotch between defenders. And yeah, as I said, there was just, a bit of a mixed bag. And, as I said, as good as people were saying Rosie were in that back half, I think his ball use combined with Josh Sin, he was Kane Farrell, he had a pretty decent-ish season.
Yeah.
But yeah, Josh Sin, all of them had lower kicking efficiency than they probably would have liked in that back area. As I said, just too many turnovers, which led to easy scores, and they just didn't make it easier for an already battled defense.
Yeah, definitely. There was so much that went wrong, and they had to just try and fill it in with personnel rather than with the talent that's actually needed. But it's as a Richmond fan, we already know how the 2024 season went, so I'm very, very familiar with having to do that.
Yeah, exactly. So you hope that with a new coach and some freshness, that they might have a chance to readjust to where they were fairly solid last year. But I would say the biggest concern here is the midfield. Because even though there were some entrances and exits, I think the biggest loss was Jason Horne-Francis near the end of the year. They were just putrid, really. There was just no method to a lot of their disposals, and they didn't really get enough bowl to be that terrible with bowl in hand. So they had 345.6 disposals per game, which is 15th. 345.6 is a very good number. Disposal differential 7.4 loss, which is 14th in the league.
Mm-hmm.
Meters differential 269.1 loss, 14th in the league. Ground ball get differential is where it's really terrible. 8.7 loss, tied with the Eagles for 18th in the league. And as I mentioned, they were okay in the center, but their outside to midfield connection was awful. Post clearance contested possession differential was a 10.1 loss, 18th in the league. Contestant post clearance ground ball get differential was a 5.8 loss, which is 18th in the league. And both of those were staggeringly higher than any other club, even West Coast. So all this led to a clearance differential, combined with a clearance differential loss of 2.3, which is 15th in the league, led to an inside 50 differential of a 6.1 loss, which is 14th in the league. So that's a huge meterage disposal territory hole that Port were having to work with for most of the game. That's why I say, like, the defense actually did okay, considering. So yeah. They did like to control the ball a bit. Their marking differential was 2.8 game, which is 8th in the league. However, their defensive 50 to forward 50 rate was 24.7, tied 17th in the league. They had very bad movement from the back half of the ground. And even just in defensive half to forward 50 rate, that was still pretty bad, 29.9, which is 12th in the league. Disposal retention rate, 68.4, 17th in the league. And their intercept possession differential, a 3.5 loss, tied 17th in the league. They were just giving so much to the opponents that it was very hard to get anything. And I think that's why we saw they were pretty much pathetic until the games where that wasn't as bad. So I think that's why we saw a few upsets like the Hawks and the Suns, where they were a bit more cleaner, controlled the game a bit better. But otherwise, yeah, it was mainly just ineffective possessions by Port Adelaide this year.
Yeah, I mean, as we've kind of just gone over, like I just continue to lose personnel where they really, really, really needed them. Like they lost so much pressure, they lost so much run and chase pace. It's like they didn't have the legs to keep up with the enemy, with the opposing team.
Yeah.
They didn't have the right people to pull off their clearances in the middle alongside just trying to support Sweet or Vicentini when Vicentini came in. And that's just everything that could have gone wrong in Hinkley's final year pretty much went wrong.
Yeah, but I will actually say, like you say, the personnel, like that midfield was pretty set. And a lot of them just had terrible retention rating. Horn Francis was actually one of the more accurate kicks in the side, which is sort of saying something when you consider how he plays. As I said, Zach Butters was okay, but a bit down. Ollie Wines is a bit of a turnover merchant these days. I think, unfortunately, I hate to say it, but Willem Drew, I think he was very ineffective a lot of the time in the midfield, and he just wasn't having much threat with this kick. And then, as I said, we were just sort of rotating a few newer players, whether it's someone like a Manny Liddy, Hugh Jackson. Even at the end, we ended up playing Ewan McKinlay for, that Suns game where, we just chucked him in the middle and, he went okay, actually. So you might actually see him a bit next year, maybe. So as I said, but they're just looking for some new players to put in because, as I said, obviously Travis Boak, or we'll get to the individual list changes in a second, but they'll be doing it with a tiny bit of different personnel in 2026.
Yes.
Which is probably needed.
Since you were kind of just about to talk about it, shall we just jump straight over to their new personnel?
Yeah, exactly.
So we will start with the outs as we normally do. Via delistings, because they picked no one up, or they lost no one in the trade period or the free agency period, but via delistings, Ryan Burton, Lachlan Charleston, Jeremy Finlayson, thank God, Hugh Jackson, Judd McEntee, and Dylan Williams, and then the retirees of Travis Boak, Willie Rioli Jr., and Rory Atkins.
Yeah, so as I said, it's pretty big outs. I don't think the delisted is that surprising. I think in hindsight, the Ryan Burton trade is very interesting because I don't think both teams got as much as they would have wanted out of that trade. Hawthorn also getting obviously Chad Wingard in that trade. Was that Wingard or was that Impey? I can't remember. But it was one of those two.
It was one of those two.
Impey probably actually provided more value. But yeah, Jared McEntee, he was a small forward that just didn't kick goals. And Dill Williams, he was a trying back half rebounder, but he was never quite in the coach's favour, and he lost a lot of disposal last season in the few games he's played. So I think it's unfair. Like he had only a bit of a dip. I wasn't really able to prove much of his caliber, but I don't think we're losing too much by shedding him off our list. So yeah, as I said, pretty straightforward, I would say.
Yeah, I think so. Jumping over to the ins now, and Port Adelaide picked up 3 players by the trade period and slash free agency, with Will Brodie coming over from Fremantle, Corey Durden from Carlton, and Jacob Ware from GWS. And via a draft, specifically the rookie draft, they signed Jack Watkins.
Yeah, no conventional draft picks, which I think they said that was the first time in AFL, modern era AFL history that's happened. Obviously, when there was zoning, I don't think they had draft picks. So whether that counts or not, yeah, as I said, but it's pretty much unheard of. But honestly, looking at their age profile, which I just mentioned now, they are the 9th oldest team in the league with an average age of 24.4, but their average games 64.9, which is the 14th most experienced. So they have enough young players in their list. They're just sort of working it out between them. So I don't think it's the biggest thing. I do think that if next year is terrible, there might be a bit of flow-on effect because, if Port lose a few players, they might get exposed, especially if Zach Butters does go to Victoria. But yeah, as I said, I'm not that concerned, but I think Port do have to bounce back to make up for the fact that, yeah, they just didn't pick anyone up this year. As for the specific ins, we'll talk about them in a little bit because I don't think there's that big an impact for them, but they all do sort of handy things.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like they're all players who were kind of on the in at their former teams, but I think are going to be far more utilized under Port Adelaide. Rather than like they were fringe, but they were like best 23 rather than like
yeah. Well, I said Will Brodie's obviously the interesting one. You'll have half the Fremantle fans saying, "Oh, there were idiots not putting him in the midfield." Others will say some of his flaws means that he's not as good. He just had that weird, very good 2022 season, and then just fell out of selection.
Yeah.
Whereas Corey Durden was sort of in a, just getting pushed out by other players, and Jacob Ware was sort of the same. So we'll go for the ones in the best 22, and the ones you've picked. You've started with Jordan Sweet.
I did decide to start with the Ruckman. He had a fantastic end of 2024, which is when he took over Soldo as the number 1 kind of ruck position, and a fantastic 2025 overall. At bar the games that Vicentini came in over him, where he did slightly fall out of favor in terms of performance, but I think the entire team as a whole was not in a great position at that time. So I think giving Vicentini some time in an actual AFL game, I think was a great idea at the time. Again, with Solo still out with injury, it'll be up to Sweet and Vicentini to keep up with the rest of the league. Sweet, for note, has broken into the top 8 of best ruckman in the league according to hit-out statistics, which is very nice. I believe he's currently 7th overall, at least according to the AFL profile. So it is very good to see him keep up in terms of that. Again, with the recent ruck changes, it'll be interesting to see the kind of impact that will have. But otherwise, I think he's doing some fairly solid work at the moment. They just need the right players around him to support him, because otherwise the hit-outs are just kind of going nowhere.
Yeah, and I think as you said, like his last year was actually pretty good for the average hit-outs, 37.3, which put him in 4th for the year. But as I said, sometimes his impact's a bit lacking around the ground. But overall, he's still a solid rock unit. I definitely think he had a better, I remember, a better middle to back half of the year. But yeah, Darcy Vicentini, it would be remiss to sort of overlook him because he was, in terms of his efforts, pretty solid. They try to put him forward a bit. Didn't really do that much, but as a ruckman, he sort of finds loose ball a bit better. Provides a bit of grit there. So I do think that Vicentini with the expanded bench is more likely to find a few more games in the best 22. I think they'll experiment with playing two rucks. Well, two main rucks, obviously Ollie Lord rucks in the forward line and can pinch hit occasionally. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what exactly Port decide to do.
Yeah, and Vicentini's
Considering that they just
still quite
don't
young
have
too.
Soldo.
Yeah, exactly. And with
Yeah, I think
Vicentini still
he's
quite young.
23.
He's like
Yeah.
22, 23.
And Sweet has technically hit Ruck Prime, which is 27. So theoretically, we should be getting the most out of him.
Actually, he's 28.
Yeah.
His birthday was like just under 2 weeks ago.
Okay, hasn't updated on Wheelo, so I apologize there. Happy birthday to Jordan Sweet. I hope you had a good one. Obviously, big fan of the podcast, so thanks for listening.
Yes, totally.
Yeah. Right.
Next,
Shall we head on to a big name that we're hoping, well, I'm hoping has a fantastic season.
yes, Jack Lukosius. When he came over from the Gold Coast Suns, there was a lot of talk about how much of an impact he could have in Port's forward line. Again, Port had just lost Charlie Dixon. Granted,
Yeah.
he was kind of not having the greatest of performances anyway. He was hitting that, retirement period. So Lukosius was signed on. Unfortunately, riddled with injury after only just a couple of games at the start. Came back and played a little bit, and then I think he got re-injured briefly off the top of my head, or he played out the rest of the season. I cannot remember.
No, he did get briefly injured in the Dockers game.
Okay, I thought so. They desperately need him fit and firing. We know he's a very, very good key forward. He's got great hands. He has a great kick. But it's just few and far between at the moment until he's able to get his legs right. It's kind of a wait and see as to how much of an impact he can really have, especially alongside Georgiadis.
Yeah, because honestly, he didn't have a bad return. Like 3 goal hauls against the Lion, 2 goal haul against Hawthorn in a very low scoring match, and 2 goals early in that Dockers game before he got injured. So there are signs. Like I mean, he was a bit proppy when he came back. I don't think he was as fit as they would have liked, but as I said, they were sort of running out of options in that forward line. So I think they wanted to reintegrate him as much as possible. But yeah, as I said, I think most people are looking forward to him having a full season to hopefully link up a bit better, utilize the very wide leading patterns of Georgiadis to maybe even, take the straight up leads, spread the defense very thin. And let someone like an Ollie Lord take a few more deep pat marks, because I think that's the biggest problem is that Ollie Lord as a deep tall forward just doesn't have much impact if he is well covered by opposition defenses.
Yeah.
He needs people to spread their field out for him to kick goals. As we saw, he had a very limited 20. I don't even think he played all that many games, but he was pretty much our only other key forward. 15 games with not many goals.
Yeah.
It was pretty bad. It
Was
where is it?
not a great look.
12 goals in 15 games for a key forward. It was just pretty rough for him, the 23-year-old.
Yes. But hopefully getting back on the park, getting fit, and hopefully we'll have a much better impact in 2026, especially with under a new system as well, with Josh Carr taking over the reins. It'll hopefully be a better time. But I'm going to jump over now to my third selection, and that is Brandon Zerk Thatcher, BZT. He looked very solid when coming back from injury early on in the season. He's on the cusp of 100 games and looks to be very, very prepared for 2026. Again, as we mentioned before with the stats, it was him, Alira, and Asava all kind of went out roughly around the same time, with multitude of injuries here and there. But they were fantastic when they were able to be. When the rest of the team just wasn't getting absolutely dumpstered. If he's able to clean up a little bit of his intercept work and spoil work, it's going to be a huge amount of help for the beat up backline.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, honestly, according to some fans, it's very tentative. Like, oh, is he actually going to be in Port's best 22 come that season? But I do think he's actually with enough support, and that's sort of the thing. I think Zach Thatcher works better when there's other faster players intercepting, and he can, sort of stick in the sort of the slow one-on-one contests because it's not too bad, but eventually sometimes he just gets exposed. Any contest that has a lead-up option, he tends to get a bit exposed, and he is the worst. Well, sorry, technically the second worst one-on-one defender in terms of loss percentage, just ahead of Aaliyah, which a few people might be surprised is technically their worst key. Well, at least one-on-one loss percentage. People quote it a lot. I don't think it's as important as people think. Because as I said, they'll say, oh, you got to have a good one. But people rag on the Sava rail like Aaliyah, and he's on 17.5, which is near top of the league for 3.1 contests. So, yeah, but Zach Thatcher, as I said, the main thing is just if you're supported, some of his downsides, which is the lack of pressure, is actually an okay disposal. But as I said, he's a very safe kicker of the football, nevertheless. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting, but they need solid defenders playing for most of the year. So I still think we need to keep them around.
Yeah,
I don't think we're quite there yet to where, as I said, like a young Harrison Ram is ready to break into the side yet.
Yeah, you definitely need to try and keep BZT locked down in that defensive role because there isn't really much availability to cover that sort of position
Yeah.
right now.
As I said, the only other option would to go a bit smaller, which Josh Carr might want to do. I think Hinkley did get a lot of flack for playing tall lineups a bit too much. But as I said, they don't really have too many solid small defenders either. They were very aggressive with their defensive half recruiting. A lot of them are more ball winners, known for their disposal more than their defensive efforts. So we're going to actually be talking about one of them right next, considering it's Miles Bergman. He's a rebound defender slash midfielder. He went in and out, as I mentioned before, switching in with Rosie, while still having to play on taller opponents when he went down back. Him and Lucky Chains had to play a lot taller when they were essentially forced to. And it just resulted in him having a breakfast season for the hyped utility player. I think there was a lot of people thinking that he might take more of a midfield role this year, and he has been training in the pure mids apparently this year. So, as I said, with a clear preseason goal of becoming a bona fide midfielder, we could see him rejuvenate. And he is looking to be a bit of a sneaky fantasy. Well, not sneaky. I think a lot of people are picking him, but it's a very common fantasy pick for rebound as a defender who's looking to get more midfield time. I do want to say some of his disposal is a bit of a worry, but it's just a question on whether that was a situation of just the way Port were playing, or whether he is just a bit more of just another Port dump midfielder.
Yeah, it's kind of tough to tell at the moment whether he's definitely the right fit for the Port midfield or if it's better to have him rotate off of halfback. And
Mm,
honestly, if he is like hard training with the mids and they're looking to actually keep him in the midfield full time, and I don't know, maybe Rosie ends up staying on that halfback line just because he is really fast and he's probably really good at
yeah.
getting that better meterage off of halfback. It's
Mm.
definitely a possibility to that it could work out long term. It's just really hard to tell at the moment whether it's the right decision.
Yeah, because I think when Rosie first went back, he was a bit too cute sometimes with his, especially handballing on the half-back line. They weren't quite in sync. As I said, they just caused a lot of back half turnovers. But actually, we'll give him props. He did actually improve towards the tail end in that back half stint. I think he cleaned up a tiny bit and sort of he had some really impressive games back there. I don't think that stint was as good as other people were saying, but I do think that Rosie as a halfbacker, given another season, um, can provide a lot of options, and he can be a very clean user of the ball. I think, as I said, it was just with a lot of people coming in and out. Port's defense, just in general, was a bit more out of sync.
Yeah, there was so many more issues that like just like personnel themselves weren't exactly going to fix.
Yeah. And finally, Todd Marshall, key forward, who is now looking to be a utility and maybe even a permanent back. Again, as I mentioned before, altogether, Zach Thatcher, Aaliyah, and Asava aren't too bad, albeit slow. But it's probably getting clearer that their bodies just in general aren't going to hold up. So they may have to pull Marshall back, which might help preserve his body, as we all know that he's had that concussion issues. And he might have the ability to push forward late in games, which will be handy.
Yes, well, that's the benefit of a utility, right? Is you're able to kind of throw them in multiple positions, and he has the skill set to be able to do that kind of thing. But
He
it's
is a
just,
lovely kick.
oh yeah,
I
like
think
he's got a
people
great
underrate.
kick. But it's
Yeah,
just like with provided you're able to have your injuries on the park, or your injured players on the park that you obviously
yeah.
need on the park, um, where do you think the best spot for him will be if Port Adelaide has their best 22, best 23?
Look, as I said, it's sort of hard because I don't think as well, it takes only one injury for him to move back into the forward line because Ollie Lord, Jack Lukosius, and bu- 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 bu-
Mitch Georgiadis?
Georgiades, thank you. Uh, Probably good enough to where you're at least playing two, if not three of those. Jack Whitlock might see a few more games, but he looked very raw in that debut season. He only played 4 games in a pretty tough time for Port, so it's a bit hard to judge. Um, but yeah, as I said, I think Port are going to be looking to change up their forward line a bit because, as I said, I think they should really be heading towards small ball, just because they don't have that key forward consistency. So I would say, still play him in the back line, refocus your forward line. Don't make it so one-on-one heavy.
Mm-hmm.
Because obviously a lot of times I went to Mitch Georgiadis one-on-one, instead of just trying to force Marshall into doing the same thing that he was before, when Port just never had that great offensive efficiency. So I think a change of scene will be good for him, but he's always welcome in the forward line.
Yeah. Hopefully they do find kind of a semi-permanent role for him. I would assume likely
Hmm.
down back. But if the ability of a utility is to be able to be thrown around if need be. So
Yeah. And I even
consistency in
got
the back line,
utility.
but if need
Hmm.
be, go forward, maybe make an impact and see what happens.
I even say utility because there are rotations where maybe we play Miles Bergman as a defender. Maybe they're like not as big a back line. Where Todd Marshall can maybe play on the wing even too, because they are lacking in marking targets. Both their wingers, which I think last season was Jace Francis, Jason, Jace
Juan Francis.
Bergman,
Oh, Jace Bergman,
he,
that's right.
Jace Bergman, Burgoyne, jeez, and occasionally
We are
Miles Bergman,
we are really
uh,
zoning out right
Jackson
now.
Mead, Jackson Mead occasionally. Um, yeah, as I said, it's just like Bergman, Burgoyne, and then Jason Torn Francis. It's just
There's a lot of mixture
a
of
lot
names.
of X names, but yeah, as I said, so I actually think that he is possibility to spend a bit of time on the wing, even if it's just a player that pushes up, because again, his disposal inside 50 as a high leading forward was pretty good. So there's no reason why he couldn't just push up a bit on that just above the forward 50 rank and try and get some good kicks inside 50 if possible.
It's entirely possible. But let's jump over now to our fresh faces.
Yes, and starting with Will Brodie, the ultimate what if. Uh, didn't find a place in Gold Coast, thought he was too slow, I think. So we went into Frio's midfield, where he was a beast at the contested possession. He was really good at getting into packs. But the knock on him apparently is that, and I sort of agree, because when you were watching him, and it was a time where Frio's midfield was very porous. He was knocked for not having a defensive side to his game. Decent tackler, but often let opponents loose. That being said, as I said, Port's outside part of their inside midfield was terrible. So it might be really good to balance out because he's great at negotiating packs and is a good ground ball winner, as he was in his peak year in Freo. So sort of the player where I don't think it's going to be as good. Like, I don't think is as great at the best 22 level as some people think he might be. But as a doing his role, he might allow others to do a few more things. As I said, I think Willem Drew was sort of trying a bit too hard. I think he's always better when he's more defensively inclined. So, having a more attacking player like Will Brodie might restore the balance of that sort of duo of like inside midfield that operate sort of outside the contest, because you obviously have Wines, Butters, Horne-Francis trying to get that first possession most of the time.
Yeah, he's. I think he's going to be a fairly solid slot in, especially with Josh Carr trying to figure out what kind of midfield he wants to run. I think Will Brodie definitely has that bit of flexibility to where he can fit in either like two specific roles. And that if that frees up Butters if need be to maybe have more of a transition style kind of role a little bit more rather than having to
Mm,
be like one of the harder on ballers.
yeah. And, as I said, it's also just because it's really funny because, like, when you look at it, Horne-Francis and Butters are such good first ball winners. Like, looking at it, I didn't actually realize this stat. Horne-Francis' first possession to clearance rate is 87.7. So when he gets hands on the ball, he is getting the clearance out there. So as I said, it's more about getting it to a system where that first clearance actually matters.
Yeah,
Because the majority of 2025, it really didn't, as you could see by those midfield stats.
yeah, that's right. And
Um,
hopefully Brody will help solve some of that issue.
yeah, yeah. As I said, I think he'll actually start the first game, but as I said, it's a question mark. But I do want to see them experiment a bit more with that midfield lineup because I don't think it really quite worked last year. Going on to someone who is listed, but I'm less sure about, is Corey Durden. Um, I don't think he's really changed his situation, Mark, as fortunately he's jumping from a club with small forward issues to a club with small forward issues. But I think Durden's a good chance to playing a fair few games for Port Adelaide, and he'll try and encourage them to get a bit craftier on ground level with some of his their general shot plays, play shots, because again, that's sort of something they were really struggling with. I do think Corey Durden might have had some complaints about how little Carlton was focused on the ground level because they were terrible at designing to get general shots. So who knows? Maybe this is like they talk to Carr, they're going to talk to try and improve that game because I think they should focus on a small forward line because that's where their next level of talent are. It might take them a step back in terms of offensive production, but in the long term, it feels much more sustainable. And yeah, Corey Durden might find his place there. Again, I don't think he'll have as big as impact as Joe Richards, but again, if he can get 20 or so goals, I think that's just going to help.
Yeah, absolutely. It solves part of their issue that they lost with Billy Rioli, of course. It's just, they
Yeah,
don't really
of
have
course.
someone that kind of fits that specific role at the moment. And Corey
Mm.
Durden, whilst he's fairly bit of a fringe player at Carlton, is able to play that kind of role. Maybe not have as much of an impact at this present point in time, but I'm sure is able to put in the hard yards and kind of get to that sort of level that Rioli was able to provide.
Yeah, the only problem is that Port Adelaide's contractual agreement with Carlton to swap random small fours every year means that we will have to cough up another one next year. It started off with obviously Orazio Fantasia, then Frankie Evans, Corey Durden. There was another one too. Who was the other Carlton player that went to Port? Oh, I can't remember.
I can't
But
help
anyway,
this one.
So, yeah. Oh no, sorry, I'm thinking Wiley Buzzer. That was
It was
no, that was
Geelong.
a Geelong player.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Anyway, yeah, Jacob Were, finishing up. Rebound defense and in question mark winger. He's sort of like he can play both. But for Port Adelaide, I can't actually tell where they specifically want him. I imagine still on the half back line. But he was on the fringes there. Comes into a side with Diane of quality ball use in their back half of the field, which he was fairly solid at least from his raw disposal. His disposal rates have always been solid.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, they just want someone that doesn't send the ball straight over to their opponents. Jacob Ware, again, he doesn't strike me as a big ball winner, but if someone can connect to him, which they do, they have a few distributors back there that can do that short, easy kick, and Ware might have a bit of an impact going the other way. Get that rate from D50 to forward 50 a lot more higher.
Yeah, he's got the build to kind of play a lot more of that winger side of role, and has the speed as well as we've seen in some of the games he played at GWS.
Hmm.
Honestly, and he does fit the rebound defender role probably a little bit more. But if you're looking at like um, keeping Rosie on that wing, and obviously they're moving. We literally just talked about him. I'm blanking so much right
Yeah,
now.
Bergman.
Yes, if they're looking at keeping Miles Bergman in the midfield, that could free up work to either stay on that other side of of halfback or bring him up towards the wing and just kind of keep a rotation going, maybe even between those three.
Yeah, and as I said, like the way that wings are sort of done these days is there's normally an offensive winger and a defensive winger. And I think Jacob Work can fill that role where you sort of stay back and you essentially just become an intercept rebound defender. Um, so as I said, it wouldn't be too different from his normal role if that's sort of how the new breed of winger will sort of approach that role that we've sort of been seeing. So yeah, so they sort of need that because Jace Burgoyne even as a defender, he doesn't have as much impact on the bigger body opponents when he's faced up against a fleshed out winger. So, being able to change those matchups a bit will tend to help. So he gets a bit more involved because his disposals are pretty good when Jace Burgoyne gets hands on ball. A bit of a downish year last year, but there's still a fair bit to like about him.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's jump over now to our reasons for optimism.
I mean, the first one for me is obviously I'm a Port supporter and I'm a huge believer in drinking the own bathwater when it comes to your team, but I will try and take a more coast to coast look at it. And if I was to give a leveled reason, I would say that pretty much 2025 was a write-off. Injuries were early, few good wins in the middle, but the entire back half injured to buggery.
Mm-hmm.
So it does give Carr a soft reset. With not much system to go off, he can sort of set the stage up for whatever style of footy he likes. And with a handful of young studs, a few veterans, they could still even make finals after their botched 2025. I don't think it's likely, but I do think that in terms of talent, it's not spread, but it's in enough areas to where they should get it done. I do think their midfield's a bit overrated, but I do think their defense is a bit underrated too. So it's like a bit of a trade-off.
Yeah, no, it's very fair, and I kind of went something similar. Like some of the other teams in the comp that have most recently got new head coaches. I can give Josh Carr the benefit of the doubt for his first year coming up. Port are coming into the season with some rough injuries, but enough on the park to where it could swing positively for a top 8 chance. Will it happen? It's extremely slim. But as long as they're able to keep their personnel on the park, very minor injuries during the 2026 season, there is definitely a chance because we know that they have the talent to be able to do so.
Yeah, exactly. As I said, it's just about restoring that system. Because yeah, as I said, there wasn't that much. But then again, it's like Port weren't exactly known for too much of their system. Under Ken Hinkley, was probably the biggest knock against them. Uh, Also just wanting to check something because yeah, okay. So Sound Pepper is the other one that I'm thinking that might be later this year because I just remembered I was meant to look up who that other player was. And the other injury that Port have is Tommy Cochrane.
Oh yeah,
He will miss the first bunch of the season.
it's not
So yeah,
too bad then in
it's
that
not
case,
terrible, but
but
yeah, as I said, it's more just
you do have a
as
lot
I
of
said,
players
ruling out
with
that ruck death.
you do have a lot of players with interrupted preseasons though because they were coming off of injuries from the 2025 season. So
Yeah, or just like stop start. So
yeah,
yeah.
so it'll probably take a little bit. Like I can't. I would imagine, and we'll talk about this in a second anyway. I would imagine that the first couple of rounds probably going to be very hit and miss. But once the
Yeah.
season goes on, promising no injuries, then I think it'll be a much more substantial season.
Yeah, exactly. And as I
How
said, like as we always judge lists, we don't expect injury, but we do like in our mind going, oh, if like just a bunch of players from a mix of their forward backline and midfield go, like how do we expect them? And I think Port have enough spread to be okay.
yeah,
But yeah, there's a few areas, especially in that forward line, where they're dropping a lot in talent by bringing the next person in.
yeah, and that, however, will just lead into our reasons for pessimism.
Yeah, and that's what I said. Port statistically have been on a downward trend. They were very lucky to be top four in 2024. I think this year even proved that a bit further. Um, they got exposed with a harder schedule and buckets of injuries. Every line sort of needs fixing in 2026, even if their defense should be the least amount to recover. And thrifty drafting, again, as I mentioned earlier, means that this core needs to be contenders. Otherwise, it's a long rebuild to blood in the players needed if it all goes wrong. Because again, like if they have a terrible season, Zach Butters leaves. You expect to lose one or two more players. It is harder to see what the next phase of Port football is going to be.
Yeah, it's really tough to kind of picture what Port will look like at the end of the year. The way that I see it, it's even though it is Josh Carr's first season as head coach, it is basically a make or break season for this core of
Yeah,
players, because they've had a fairly few successful seasons of recent times, bar last year. Um, it's just this season will basically be able to tell us whether the rebuild is coming sooner or later, essentially.
yeah. Well, I'd argue it's actually happened now. I guess more so is like whether the rebuild is like a proper rebuild, as in like a Richmond, a West Coast, or whatever, where there's actually going to be a bottoming out period. Because yeah, there's definitely potential for that.
Mm.
It's not this year, but as you mentioned, like 2007, 2008 could be a bottom out year if things go wrong. So I think what we're saying is we need to see a bit of improvement in system. Otherwise, I think a few players who have been loyal for a very long time start to lose a bit of confidence with the Port Adelaide Football Club.
Yeah, it's the biggest concern, and like we know, that as much as we know the players loved Ken Hinkley, we know
Hmm.
that like the rest of the rest
The
of
media
I guess
landscape,
the
really.
media landscape, the Port Adelaide
Well, more
supporters to some
supporters. The
degree,
media loved him
um,
for,
they love the storylines
yeah,
that he created. Like,
I think so. I love the storylines he created, but yeah, as I said, I do think he was like
it's how you make
a
good
B
media.
plus coach.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of positives, and anyone saying that like Ken Hinkley does more bad than good, like, is just talking rubbish.
yeah,
But there is a limit to his strategy. I don't think that's ever been that controversial to say.
agreed.
And there's been a few seasons of Port where that's sort of been a bit of a letdown. where they haven't been able to make out for deficits in their list.
Yeah, 100%. And it just brings into question as to when this the when the I guess the major part of the rebuild begins, like how much of this core is going to want to stick around and like
Yeah.
bring in like the younger blood of players, or are they going to try and chase success somewhere else?
Yeah, because as I said, there's no doubt like Port really stretched out this premiership window probably a couple of years too much. Because as I said, they've done a lot of trading of first round draft picks. Honestly, they've drafted really well considering like what they've had to work with. But there is a limit to that. And we're seeing now even some players that were sort of pushing onto the park really before their form really suggests. Last year was mainly because of injury. But, as I said, there's also the flip side where there probably should be a few more fringier players pushing into the side that just aren't, which is why we saw a few mediocre players, especially in our forward line,
Yeah,
just not have much of an impact in 2025, but still never got dropped.
yeah, yeah. That's right. All right, that'll bring us down to our verdict.
Yes, and obviously, because it's my verdict, I've sort of written a lot. And I do think that will have signs for optimism. I do think their midfield needs another year to sort itself out, and their forward line is pretty atrocious unless Luca has an almighty year. We'll go to the Drake meme. It's like Luca for the Lakers. I sleep. Luca for Port Adelaide. That's what gets me excited. So I can see them winning most of the easier part of their schedule, but it's hard to see them close that huge gap between them and the top teams that spank them
Yeah,
in 2025. I do think they're the sort of team that will win most of the games around them, probably have a drop against like a St Kilda, Carlton, Sydney, but maybe an upset win. But I don't see them getting that much past 10 wins, which will probably put them between 10th and 15th. I think 7 wins would be pretty disastrous, but, not unthinkable. But I think that's probably where their bottom ceiling is. Yeah, they'll just be middle of the pack. They might sneak a pity final now that they've extended that. But I don't think they're going to be too much of a threat. But it will be interesting to see the way they go about it.
yeah, I completely agree. I think they're a team that can kind of bring a sense of normalcy back into where their expectations are. And that means like I guess quote unquote pushing finals. But whether they actually like can secure that, that's I'd say it's quite slim. And they'll probably end up
Yeah.
kind of finishing about I would say like a 13th kind of position, maybe maybe 12th, 11th. But it's going to be like very very slim in terms of trying to make it back to finals contention.
Yeah, it's just hard because again, it really depends on because a lot of people are saying that there's like a few of the teams that missed out last season with a bit of upside, Sydney, St Kilda, some of it which I believe, some of it I don't.
The dogs
But I think
continuously being the
those,
big ones.
yeah, well, again, I guess we'll get to that, but I actually have more belief in the Dogs than the other two. But again, it will depend on how those teams go. Because yeah, I think in terms of talent, on par. I think Sydney are technically ahead of him. Maybe St Kilda's arguable, but again, I'm fairly negative when it comes to the Saints. But yeah, as I said, it's about getting that system. Like the Saints have, even with their list, had a couple of years to work out the system. We've seen them being crafty in their forward line. But yeah, we'll be talking about them in a couple of weeks. Next episode, we'll have Richmond. So
Yes.
this is back to back fan episodes, I guess. But yeah, that's it. Overall, just as like a finals fan note. As I said, I'm actually, as much as it's painful to know that realistically we should see Port dipping, um, I'm still optimistic that at least we just get to see a new era of football and some new ideas because I think that's been a bit overdue for the fan base. It did feel a bit like Sisyphus, except instead of getting the ball all the way up the hill, it sort of got 3/4 of the way and then just fell down in spectacular fashion.
Yeah, that very much feels like what I've been having to deal with in the past 2 seasons. So I very much relate to that right now.
Well, the Tigers arguably got the ball up the hill 3 times. If in this metaphor, getting that up is the premiership.
Hey, I said past 2 seasons. I didn't say past 10 years.
No. Well, that's what I'm saying. It's like Port was more turnover the last 5 years. You know, you get the prelim, you feel like you're about to get there, and then it just comes
And
tumbling
it just
down
drops.
again.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a better way to put it.
Yeah.
But yeah, is there anything else?
No. We can outro.
Yes, that does bring us to the end of the Port Adelaide episode of the Preseason Analysis series. Thank you also so much for coming to like, comment, subscribe, and just come and hang out with us as we yap about this wonderful sport that we love. The next episode is indeed by Team Richmond. Then I believe it's St Kilda after that. So that'll be the next couple of episodes. As we had said in our last batch of episodes, it's kind of a sad period of time because all of these teams in this kind of block aren't doing very well. So we apologize for that, but that's just how the AFL season went, and so we're going to cover it. Stay tuned. The Richmond episode will be out on Friday, as this episode will go out on a Tuesday. So we will see you all very, very soon. So until then, take care.